Debbie from Line Doodle Design, and for this month's video feature for Simon's stamp, Doodling with Debbie, I'm painting one of the lovely plant images from Simon's Plantiful Pen set in a simple no-line watercolour style. This Plantiful Pen set is so up my street with its plant outlines with pots, jugs and jars to accessorise, and I've been dying to use it. I'm starting out by stamping the aloe vera image from the set in antique linen distress ink on Ultra's cold press watercolour card. This is my favourite starting off point for any no-line watercolouring. Distress inks are water reactive, and also this particular colour is very light, and that means that as I watercolour, the ink will react with the water and blend into the painting. I stamped the image multiple times to get a good clear outlined colour on this textured watercolour card. I then repeated the process with the terracotta pot. I debated whether to stamp one of the images in black on craft card when using this set, and then selectively colour various elements with colour pencils. However, when it came down to it, one of my favourite things to paint is a terracotta pot, and so the watercolours won out in this battle of the colouring media. The paints that I'm using are from Daniel Smith, and if you're interested in trying these out, then a great way to do so is to pick up my dot sheet from Simon's Stamp, which has a small sample of my favourite colours. I've not taped my card down to a board as I'm not going to be using a lot of water today, and so there's no risk of the card warping. However, I have taped it to my surface with washi tape, and that's to stop me moving the card around all the time as I paint and make you feel travel sick. I'm going to be dotting around the image, painting one area after another, and this is to prevent colour running from one section to another. If I painted the leaf next to the flower, then the paint would move with water and blend together. So to get defined shapes, it's important to ensure that one area is dry before painting the one next to it. You could use a heat tool to dry each area, but as I have a number of things I can be working on, then initially at least I'm going to move around the image, painting a bit of the pot, followed by a few petals and then a leaf, etc. For the flowers, I must admit I didn't know what aloe vera flowers looked like, and so I turned to trusty Google to look them up, and noticed that some of the aloe vera plants have flowers which have a gradient of colour from yellow at the base to a rich pinky red at the tips. And I thought painting my flowers like this would bring in a nice pop of colour, and also the changing colour up the flowers would help separate the petals from one another. With no-line watercolouring, where you don't have an outline to define areas within an image, it's important to get variations in shade and highlight so that, for example, the leaves don't just become one great big green blob. So to do this, I mix a relatively concentrated colour and paint in the shadow area, such as the base of a leaf, and then rinse my brush and dab it on a paper towel, and now with my just damp brush, I draw the colour out towards the highlighted areas, such as the tips of the leaves. So for those of you that like to talk specific paint colours, these are the main ones I used, although sometimes I just grabbed a mix off my palette. So for the terracotta pot, I used QUINACRIDONE Gold, plus HEMATITE Burnt Scarlet Genuine, and Rose of Ultramarine for shadows. For the leaves, I used Ultramarine Turquoise plus LUNAR, and then touches of QUINACRIDONE Coral for variation. And for the flowers, I used HANSA Yellow Light plus QUINACRIDONE Coral. I continued painting the first layer of the rest of the leaves in the same style as before, and now I've jumped ahead slightly to where I'm adding the last of the petals in the deepest colour. I mixed a touch of green into the pinky red mixture for my petals for the topmost ones, as green is the complementary colour to red, and it neutralises and knocks back the brightness of the red slightly, which I felt was more in keeping with the subtler shades elsewhere in the image. I'm starting to add a few more details and layers now. I love to see terracotta pots which have been weathered by the elements and have mossy growths on their sides, and so I brought in a touch of green in patches on the pot. I want to keep things simple though, so I'm not going to fiddle too much, but I added a few slightly darker layers to add dimension and to help define each area from its neighbour, and then I called the painting done. I fussy cut the plant and pot and then set it to one side while I worked on the rest of the card. For the background, I thought the open circle of the centre cut geometric pattern stamp would create a great focal area for the plant pot to sit. That's one of the great things about these centre cut stamps, of which there are a variety of different designs, in that the background can be stamped separately from the centre image, which in turn can be stamped separately on its own, or equally the pieces can be fitted together and stamped as one. I placed a piece of Simon's Stamp fog card in the MISTI and treated it with a powder tool. I then stamped the image a few times in Simon's Stamp clear embossing ink to get a good impression, and sprinkled with Simon's Stamp white embossing powder. I recently topped up my white embossing powder tub, and it feels great to have ample powder to sprinkle over the image. However, it does appear I missed a spot, because once I'd heat embossed the powder there was a gap. But no worries, as I plan to cut this piece down to a panel and have the focal point offset slightly, and so I made sure to cut the gap away as I trimmed the piece down to be slightly smaller than an A2 card. I added plenty of foam adhesive to the rear of the background panel and added this to an ivory card base. I then added more foam adhesive to the back of the plant pot, and I did that over the open circle area. I chose the sentiment from the set, and this set has some great options, many of them punny play on words, and also this one which suits me perfectly, as despite starting my university studies looking at plants, I still managed to kill many houseplants from either under or over watering. I stamped the sentiment in clear embossing ink on slate card and white heat embossed before trimming to a banner and adding beneath the aloe vera with foam adhesive. I did think about adding some sequins or Nouveau crystal drops to this card, but in the end I preferred to keep it clean and simple and let the watercolour stand out on its own. And that completes this aloe vera card with simple no-line watercolouring. On the Simon Says Stamp blog you will find a coordinating blog post, as well as details of the supplies I've used today. If you want to find me, I blog over at limedoodledesign.com. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.